Oh, Barbara, thanks so much for joining today and for the people who will be watching. I'm very pleased to be joined by Barbara Tannenbaum, curator of photography at the Cleveland Museum of Art. So Barbara has spent decades shaping museum collections and exhibitions. Before coming to Cleveland, she led the curatorial area at the Akron Art Museum for over 25 years, where she oversaw major collection growth and organized more than 80 exhibitions. Many of them focused on photography and video. Her projects have ranged from historical surveys to monographic retrospectives and contemporary work. And her scholarship has helped define how several photographers are understood today. So, what I am interested in and what I think makes your perspective really valuable is that you've worked not just with individual objects, but how collections evolve, how they're interpreted, expanded, and preserved for future audiences. So, Barbara, thank you so much. Thanks so much for being here, and I'm glad to be talking with you today. And I know that people listening, collectors, anyone who owns photographs, really want to learn from you. So thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for inviting me to be here, Janet.
Fantastic. Um, okay, so I want to just jump in and
Jump
start
in.
with my first question, which is, how is your understanding of what belongs in a collection changed over the course of your career?
Well, I would say it hasn't so much changed as it's refined over the years. I mean, I was at the Akron Art Museum for 26 years, and now I've been at the Cleveland Museum for almost 15 years.
Yeah.
And both of those collections I have greatly expanded through some purchases and a lot of wonderful, generous gifts from collectors. And I think that, you know, one of the things that it's often hard for collectors to understand about how curators collect and how it's different is that we can't just buy what we like or what we sort of feel is a new discovery or whatever. We have to have sort of um, a more comprehensive overview of the history of the field
Hmm.
or of the contemporary state of the field, and then try to collect to represent that. And also, we really need to think about the context, the collection, what else we have that it will be shown with. It's no good having something if you're not going to show it, and you're not going to show it if you don't have something next to it on the wall that makes sense with it. It tells a story.
Right.
And while I might, as you know, at home, you know, my husband and I, you know, we don't have a lot of money to collect, but if we see something that we've liked, you know, we might get it. But if for the museum, I really need to realize that it plays a role in a story that's told by the collection as a whole. And so it has to fit within a kind of an intellectual framework. And that's, you know, it's not one single story that you're telling necessarily. Nobody has that kind of comprehensive collection or option, but or very few places do anyway. But you might be telling several stories or many different stories. But there needs to be a relationship between the works so that they end up on the walls in the galleries making sense.
Exactly. And so when you came into Cleveland, when you started there, I would imagine that one of the first things is to look at the collection and see. I mean, I guess when you're talking about acquisitions, you're also kind of like looking for like what people call holes in the collection, gaps in places. And so that leads your direction. Is that accurate?
Yeah, very accurate. One of the things that museums have been doing, not at the beginning of my career, but oh, well, for the last at least 30 years, maybe 25 years, 30 years, is that most institutions ask their their curators to have strategic plans. And that does exactly what you were just talking about. You look and see what you have in the collection. You decide whether to build to your strengths or to fill in gaps and holes or to do both. Which of the holes are the most important? Which work the best? And so, for instance, Cleveland, the collection started really in relationship to the works in other media and painting, drawing, prints.
Hmm.
And that's how they were used. There were these smaller galleries where those things were on display next to the larger galleries with painting and sculpture. And so they were thought of in that context. So we had really focused about on photography as art that related to art.
Uh-huh.
But of course, what I love about photography is that the boundaries are very porous between commercial work, photojournalism, fine art photography. I mean, I love that overlap and the porousness of the borders because the many of the historical photos that we have in museums now were not made as art. And so it's definitely an important part of the integral part of the history of the medium. And so, you look for what holes you are. And one of the things we didn't have a lot of was photojournalism or documentary work.
Hmm.
And so I've been able to grow that thanks to gifts from very generous collectors, especially George Stephanopoulos, whose interest in news, politics, and documentary history is, of course, strong.
Hmm.
And so, that's one of the gaps that it was wonderful to be able to fill in and add to. We had 30s documentary work, but we didn't have 60s, 70s, 80s documentary work. And so it was wonderful to be able to fill that in and have a stronger collection. And so that's what you do is you look for the holes, but then you decide which ones can you afford to fill. There's some holes I'd love to fill, but there's no way we could afford to do that. And then there's other times when you decide to build to your strengths and to create a more in-depth section of the collection.
Hmm. Hmm.
So those decisions are all made in a very strategic, slow, often I know frustrating for dealers and collectors who want to donate things, but in a very slow and methodical way. And the bigger the institution, the slower and the more methodical.
Right, right, right. And when you are doing that, filling in gaps, deciding where things need to do, like what are the kinds of things that you look for when you're looking to acquire things? What do you feel like it makes it feel more coherent rather than that you're just, going to say buy, documentary work from the 60s or 70s and just, so that that is filled, but are you like what are the factors that you think of when you want it to be more coherent with your collection? Like
Well, because I'm not, and almost no curators are just collecting. We're also doing exhibitions. I always think of things in terms of how they will work in the gallery with other works in our collection or loans from the community or loans from outside. How does it make a show? How does it tell a story? Because photographs are light sensitive, we don't have a permanent installation like we do for our paintings and sculptures, where a few things may change, things may go out on loan, but basically, if you come here, you'll be able to see the same Degas, the same Cezanne, time after time, and it tells a cohesive story. But with light sensitive media, things are only up for between three and at most 6 months, and usually never that long.
mm,
And so it's always a changing stories. And I don't just put up like a bunch of stuff. Here's this photograph and that photograph. It needs to be a show. It needs to have a theme or tell a story or go into greater depth than a single artist. I mean, we had very few, and we still do, very few holdings in great depth of single artists. That's not the way our collection was conceived, and it's not the way it's grown for the
mm,
most part.
mhm,
So one of my goals was to be able to maybe have a few of those groups of artists in depth so that when you all of a sudden have a hole or you need to fill something in and you don't have any money to do loans, that you can pull something out of your collection that's a cohesive show that can be done quickly and efficiently. So that's something a collector doesn't need to think about at all, but it's something that curators need to think about in terms of the future exhibition schedule. And I also, because the 26 years of my career, I was at the Akron Art Museum, which is a modern and contemporary museum, 1850 to the present.
Hmm.
So the context was the history of photography, basically, in terms of other art media as well. Um, so you think about that. But here I'm in a comprehensive museum, and we have everything from, um, you know, Neolithic and Egyptian all the way up through the present. And mine is really one of the only departments that can cover all of those in the sense that we don't have photographs that were made when the Greeks were around, but we have photographs of Greek ruins and sculptures in the 1800s before they were conserved, mid 1800s, before they were conserved and sort of prettified up and things like that. So, or the pyramids or things like that. So, the sphinxes half buried under sand, all those
I love
wonderful
that.
things.
Yeah.
And so I try to think about things that can be in dialogue with other departments in the museum and can complement their holdings. Um, and so that's another guide in terms of, what to collect are things that enter into conversation with other parts of the collection.
Hmm. Hmm.
And again, that's something a private collector may or may not want to think about.
Right, right. And I imagine you probably talk with other curators about that very
Oh,
thing.
yeah, absolutely.
Yes,
And I
yeah.
love to collaborate with them. And I mean, we have a dedicated, we're lucky enough now, we didn't for many of the first years of the department, but since I believe around 2010, 2009, we've had a dedicated photo gallery, which is about 2,000 square feet. But
Hmm.
I love, as I sort of ironically say, to get photos out of the photo ghetto and into the other galleries if possible.
Yes.
So yeah, I definitely want to do things that work with other departments and have them use photographs in their exhibitions.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fantastic. And I think probably my one of my third questions, which I think you pretty much covered, but I was asking about if the decision is more about an individual work or the story it helps the collection tell, which I think you covered. A lot of it is about helping what the collection, to tell. And do you want to say anything more about that? Like, what if you come across an individual piece and do you ever try to be like, well, it wasn't exactly what I was focused on, but it may work in this other area that, that could work in communication with the collection? Like, do you ever get in a little bit of a tug of war between like, I love this piece, I want it for the collection, but I'm not quite sure where it would fit. Maybe it could go here or there. What happens when you run into a situation like that?
Yeah, it does happen sometimes, and I think if you find a piece and it's really as a curate buying as a curator, it's not so much that I love it, it's that I really think that it's brilliant or it speaks to something in a really novel way. It advances the field. I mean, the other thing is that with contemporary, and we're buying contemporary and acquiring contemporary through gifts as well, you don't maybe have that framework established yet. So you have to take a chance. And one of the things that's been amazing about having a career that's now spanned 4 decades is that I can actually go back and look from at least this distance and see how some of those decisions um,
Right.
lasted through time. And so far, I've got a pretty good average, I must say. But when you're buying contemporary work, sometimes, often you don't have that context. You're trying to bet on what the context will be in the future. And I think if work is important, if it strikes me as important and taking the field in a new direction or likely to be influential or to be to express something that is really crucial to the time that
Right.
we're living in, then yes, I will argue for its acquisition, and you take a bet on that, and then in the future you try to build a context for it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love that. I think that's so important. So, as a dealer, I work a lot with collectors, and a lot of times their focus is on the rarity of the piece or the market value of the piece. But from your perspective, from the museum's perspective, and beyond what you have mentioned so far, what other factors carry weight in acquisition decisions?
I think it's, well, first of all, like Cleveland especially, but even in Akron, I mean, quality, the quality of the print, the condition of it, if it's historical work especially, those are all very important. But I think that even more crucial is the meaning of the work in terms of both what it says to the viewer and also in terms of what it says about the time in which it was made. So I think that that's even more than,
Can you say more about that, the time in which it was made?
sure. I mean, if you have a work that, I mean, for instance, I look at Julia Margaret Cameron's photographs of women,
Hmm.
and she has ones where she has them dress up and they're allegorical and they're the Virgin Mary or they're, a mythological figure. But she also did some amazing portraits, for instance, of her niece, Julia Jackson,
Hmm.
becoming
Hmm.
the mother of Virginia Woolf.
Yes.
And those, there's one where she stares straight in the mirror and she has her hair down, which in Victorian times um, was a symbol of a woman, and she was a little old for that, but who, hasn't married yet, who hasn't entered into, you wouldn't do it in public. It would be very lascivious for a woman of her age to have her
Hmm.
hair down. So it's a very private moment, and she's about to get married in a couple of weeks. And she's looking into this mirror as if she's looking into her future and that transition between girlhood and womanhood. And, you know, it's it speaks about the time in which it was made, and it also speaks a kind of more universal, timeless phenomenon. And so that kind of work, I think, stands as singular. And so that sort of thing where you know that a work is going to connect with an audience, where you feel that it um, civil rights, some of the civil rights era photos, for instance, are just amazing. Danny Lyons coverage, for instance. I think that those works are really um, important, not because they might be rare or because they might be valuable, but because of the story that they tell, the meaning they hold, and the time and the situation in which they were made. Because it is we're the people that have become curators are usually, not always, sometimes they're artists, but often they are historians of art. And
Yeah.
so we are predisposed towards history and telling a historical story. And so for us, I think that becomes important. And the museum as a whole, a collection will tell the story, um, maybe of the history of the time, but also maybe of the history of the medium. So you've got those two aspects of history that you're looking at. And those in some ways might be more important than rarity or value.
Yes, yes, I agree. I agree. And I often think that that's one of the things that I love about photography is that all of these different tracks of history at the same time, that taking a photograph of what you see out in the world. So you're taking, you know, an exposure of what's happening in that moment, particularly if it's something important happening, like with civil rights photographs and all of that sort of thing. And then you have the history of what is happening in the history of photography and the different um, movements that are happening and where it fits with that, and also the history of the individual artist themselves and where it fits within with what they're doing. And then, of course, the history of the print itself.
Provenance, yeah.
Yeah.
The next show that's going to be in the photo gallery, which opens May 10th, is France in the time of Manet and Morisot, because we have the Manet Morisot show where it looks at the paintings of, we're going to be hosting it, of how there was a mutual influence between Edouard Manet and Berthe Morisot. And everybody's always said it was just Edouard Manet influencing Berthe Morisot. But in fact, at the end of his life, there was a mutual, he was influenced by her work. And so I'm doing France in the time of Manet and Morisot. And it's fascinating because we have great holdings from the early history of photography, the 50s, 60s, 70s in France. And that exactly has those layers that you were talking about, the show does, because it's about the rise of photography as a medium. It talks very much about the change in urban renewal in France and in Paris and modernization. So it
Uh-huh.
talks a lot about the social forces, about the Franco-Prussian War. Um, and it also talks about the history of these individual photographers, most of whom started as painters before photography existed.
Right.
And then we're lured by the new medium, and we're also lured by the possibility of great profits because it was a very entrepreneurial profession in France in those days. So
Yeah.
you get those same layers of levels of different kinds of histories, different kinds of stories. And then, the wonderful, we have some daguerreotypes, we have some, and of course, tons of albumen prints, salted paper prints. So it talks also about the physical history of the medium and the object. So yeah, those stories, when you can overlap them all, it's really very fulfilling.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I love that so much. So, have you ever encountered collections out in the world that you felt that they were like compelling on an individual level, but they were more complicated from an institutional standpoint? Like, you saw them and you loved it and you loved that they what they were talking about and what was there, but you were just like, this would not work in a museum, you know.
Well, I think it depends on the museum. Different museums have different stories to tell and different definitions of their collection. So, for instance, we don't collect a lot of vernacular work. We have very little of it. That sort of thing is wonderful. Excuse me a minute, but it doesn't really work as well in our collection unless it had a relationship to another part of the collection. Um, Works, collections that have a lot of work that may be important but not in great condition, in terrible condition,
Right.
is something that we probably wouldn't take. I think that the important thing for collectors to know is that most museums want to pick and choose from a collection. A collector, just like when collectors start collecting, a lot of times, first of all, they start out with something that's, I call an entryway drug, something that's easy and pleasant to live with, and they may get bored with it. Usually they do. They get bored with the first few things they've collected, and then they move on to more um, sophisticated concept of how the works fit together
Mm-hmm.
and how they fit into the history of the medium. And so, a museum is going to want the works that are the more important ones, are the more significant ones, at least they think they're going to be. And then also, if we're talking about contemporary work, and then also something that fits with their collection. So there might be things in a collector's collection, but we already have a lot of holdings in that area, or it isn't a story that we tell. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's rare that museums can easily digest a collection as a whole that's grown up, unless that collector has really refined and refined and refined that collection. And the other thing is, you're not going to take, say, somebody has 10,000 photographs and your collection is 4,000. I mean, and they're all on one subject. I mean, you're probably not going to take that. Um, you might want 100 of them, but you're not going to take, 10,000 of them.
Right.
So,
Right.
unless it was a very special circumstance. So, I think that institutional collecting has to be more targeted because we have to care for these objects more or less in perpetuity. We have to
Right.
provide climate controlled storage, conservation, proper storage in terms of materials and everything. And so it's a huge commitment of time and money, not only now, but in the future.
Right.
And museums do routinely purge their collections and refine them just like collectors do, but not with the same freedom and ease.
Right.
And so it's easy for a collector to shift the contents of their collection. They can just decide to sell it and they give it to a dealer or put it at auction or give it to an institution. But museums, we have all these bureaucratic procedures to go through to be sure that as I said, slow, methodical. And we're the
Right.
same way when we get rid of work. And so, it's a big decision. And I think for collectors sometimes who have much more freedom to act, it's hard to understand the nature of the strategic planning that goes into museum decisions.
Right, right. So, that just reminds me, I mentioned that I interviewed David Raymond a couple of years ago, and his collection through part purchase, part donation went to the Cleveland Museum of Art. But before you were there, a few years before you
That's
were
right. Tom
there,
Henson acquired that.
right? And his, a curated collection of surrealist artwork. So is that just something where like all the stars aligned in terms of where the gap was in the collection and what he, the types of work that he collected, or is there something you can speak to about, how that all worked out?
Well, my understanding is that we had identified a gap, which was that sort of 20s, 30s European and American modernist surrealism work. And so we were looking for a collection with that focus.
Mm-hmm.
And so a dealer made the connection. I think it was Chuck Isaacs. Again, I wasn't here at the point in time, but to David Raymond. And then, even then, there were selections made. It was not a wholesale swallowing of the collection,
Mm-hmm.
but it was picking and choosing and shaping and forming what the acquisition would be.
Yes.
And so, and it worked out very well. And actually, that was one of the early shows that I did when I came here was a show of that collection.
Oh,
And and we did show everything that we got from him in that show, which is rare that you can do that as well.
right.
So that was really wonderful. But I think, and David's a very astute collector. He has a great eye. He's knows the market well. So, it was a wonderful acquisition to make, and so glad that we have it. And it really did fill in a lacuna in our collection. But it was still, there were selections made. There was a honing down, a refinement of the choices.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's institutional collections often, unless it's a very young institution who doesn't have any work or whatever, you really most of the time you need to figure out what fits with what you have and what you have space for and what you can afford.
Right. Right. A lot of considerations. Um, so this leads well into my next question, which is, so when a collector begins thinking about the long-term life of their collection, because they really are just stewards for it, um, what kind of decisions early on make a difference later, when they're at the end of their collecting journey and they're trying to figure out what to do, and the thought of, maybe some of these could go to a museum, um, either through purchase or donation. Like, what kinds of things do you think that early decisions they made make a difference? If you've seen anything like that.
Well, I think, well, for one thing, I would really recommend that people make a decision to collect work that's in great condition.
Yes.
Don't go for a cheaper print that's not in as good condition or that doesn't have as good a provenance or, depending on whether we're talking about contemporary work or historical work, but, really, and make sure that you store or house or exhibit your collection in a way that preserves it. That's really important. A lot of people don't realize that if they're just starting collecting and they'll put a work right in the light from a window or something. And that's been very sad to see, but especially color work, early color work. And I think another thing is to realize probably that the first few things you collect, you may not end up with in the end. They may be things that aren't as your taste may change and grow, or your focus may change and grow.
Mm-hmm.
Not every collection is focused too. Some people just buy what they like, and that's fine too.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but and then the other thing is to really don't go for bargains. I mean, I've seen collectors they want to get a bargain, and so they'll buy something at auction, like it's a famous name, maybe, but it's not the right work, or it's not an important work, or it's not a great work, but it was cheap and it was by a famous artist, or they don't know the condition and they don't go to see it and they don't send anybody to see it, and it arrives at their house and then it's in terrible shape or it needs conservation or whatever. I think like anything, any major purchase, you need to do your due diligence. You need to study.
Absolutely.
That's another thing I've had, especially businessmen. They don't want to, some of them have asked me I don't want to read about the history of photography. I don't want to read about this artist. I just want the executive summary. And I say, you need to, before you buy, look at as much work as you possibly can in the original. See the actual prints. Go to if you're going to buy it in auction, go to the auction preview, ask them to take it out of the frame. Go to as many shows as you can. Go look at as many collections as you can. Look at as much as you can and study before you buy.
Exactly.
And I think it's really important. You can make those first few impulse purchases, and that's fine. And you may end up with them, or you may not. You may get rid of them along the way. But once you get into collecting in a serious way, you need to be informed. You need to be informed about the context and the history of the kind of work that you're buying, and you need to be informed about the physical condition and how that impacts the future life of the photograph. And that includes contemporary artists who are working with odd materials and things.
Right, the longevity of that. But I agree. I think it takes a while to just kind of hone your eye and to looking, and the looking is about being able to know when you come across an extraordinary print, the craftsmanship and the quality, and being able to identify, this is a really great print. And sometimes it can be hard to articulate, what makes a really great print. Like sometimes, it's just the way that sometimes it's the paper, sometimes it, or if, because it's a platinum print, when the artist usually would do a gelatin silver print or something like that. But, I've seen the same print by a famous artist, you know, two prints, same image. One is fantastic. The other one, there's nothing, maybe sometimes there's nothing like technically wrong with it. It's fine. But there's no life to it. It's flat. It doesn't, sing. It doesn't do anything. And it takes a lot of looking to just to be able to get to that point where you can, something just kind of like catches your breath. And you're like, but if you haven't seen all the other iterations or just been looking at what a great print should look like or what a bad print, looks like, you'll never be able to do that. So that's a really excellent point.
Well, and I think that, dealers like you uh, are great resources for collectors, and they shouldn't feel like they need to buy everything at auction at a bargain. A good dealer, a reputable dealer, will help you through this and learning curve. And also, different dealers, I mean, none of us know everything about all the printing by every artist. So,
Right.
depending on what, area somebody's collecting in, make a relationship with a dealer in that area and have them help guide you. If you tell them that you're looking for the best print of a particular, by a particular artist of a particular image, they'll go out and do the hunting in ways that you can't.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important not to just rely on yourself, but to also take advantage of the resources. And dealers, reputable, knowledgeable dealers are a great resource.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Because we do, you know, we're dealing with both the artistry of the print and also the marketplace at the same constantly, and it is, I always am explaining to collectors, why this is a special print, what attributes it has that makes it so fantastic. And it's a way, if there is a collector who's sort of like, give me the executive summary as you did, it's a great way to just kind of like collapse that learning curve, borrow our learning curves since we've been living and breathing photography for decades, and to be able to take advantage of that as a resource for them with their collecting, because those nuances, and I say like so much of it is not taught in books. Like you can't so much of the connoisseurship, you could read about, the history of photography and monographs of certain artists and all of those sorts of things, but is it going to tell you about, the history of how they sign their prints, how that may have changed over the years, or the type of mounts that were used, or the stamps at different times? Those kinds of things. There's no book for that.
Right, not in our field. Like print in
Yeah.
print collecting, they have these wonderful catalog raisonnés, but we have almost none, maybe two or three for major figures, and they're not really the same kind of exhaustive catalog raisonnés. We just don't have that in the field of photography.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you need to rely on experts and even curators, rely on other curators and on dealers because, you guys have seen so many more of the photographs than we have in many ways.
Because we're always looking.
Yeah, you're always out
Yeah.
there and they're flowing through your hands. I mean, that's,
Yeah.
whereas when we buy something, it stops here.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so if collectors could understand just like one thing about how museums think, what what would you want them to know?
That we are, I guess it goes back to the story. We're telling a story or various stories with the collection. And so, um, and it's the same way with artists. I mean, there are many, many living artists whose work is really good, but a lot of it doesn't fit in with what we need to do, or it doesn't fit in our collection. And
Mhm.
so we may um, say no thanks for a gift, or may choose not to purchase work by a certain artist. It doesn't mean that that isn't good or great, even. It just means it doesn't fit within our collecting scope
Mhm.
or what we think we can do with it. Or if a work is, um, crazy hard to store or whatever. I mean, I think that you need to realize that the decisions that we make, it isn't the same, it isn't based maybe on how much we love an image or how much we think it is a great image, but how it fits with what we already have because we have a steward, just like a collector is a steward. We are also a steward for future generations.
Mhm.
And we're a steward for an institution that I don't care how big you are, you have limited storage space,
Mhm.
limited funds.
Mhm.
And so you really need to think, we have to think strategically,
Yes.
not just with our heart and our eyes, but also we have to keep other things in mind.
Yes.
And one of them, alas, is the pocketbook and the amount of physical space and the opportunities that we can provide to use that work in ways that get it out to the public.
Right. Because you want to make sure that you're doing right by the work, you know. But that's a really good point because I do come across collectors and they're like, oh, well, I'll just donate it here, or I'll donate it there when I'm ready. And I'm just like, well, that's not something you should just simply assume, that any place will take, even if it's fantastic. It's just all of those factors that you just described. It needs to be in alignment with, with the museum's mission and their collection and what they're trying to do, and that they have space for it and can take care of it properly.
Yeah, and if your local, I mean, get to know your local curators and your local museums. Just, I say the same thing to artists as well as to collectors, because both we have things to offer you, and also because if you do have that, ultimate goal in mind, find out what our limitations are and what our needs are and what our story is that we're telling.
Right.
And if we're not the right institution, we might help you find another one. People
That's a
are
very good
sometimes
point.
shocked when curators will say,
Yeah.
"Oh, this isn't right for me, but so and so would like it,"
Right.
and we pass them
Right.
along, and they're like, "Whoa." Um, but most places are very collegial and collaborative, and we all love these objects. We love this medium, and
Yeah.
we want to see the objects go to places where they will be used and enjoyed.
Yes. Yeah. That's wonderful. And if a collector is thinking in that direction, I mean, do you just get phone calls or emails asking you things? Or do you have like a collectors group at your museum?
We have a group called the Friends of Photography, which initially started out as a collectors group. And as it's grown, it's become more of a, there are a lot of people most people in it are not collectors, but they love photography and they help promote photo activities here at the museum and also at other institutions in town.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I get phone calls, emails. One is you can't spend all your time doing that. We have lots of other things we have to do, like exhibitions and
Yes.
acquisitions and
Yeah.
lectures. But most institutions are eager to help, and also big institutions like we have a fabulous library, an amazing
Mhm.
one of the third largest art library in the country in terms of
Oh,
institutions,
I didn't know
museums,
that. Wow.
and it's a great resource. And the librarians there live to serve. They want to help you research. They want to help you answer your questions. And so that's another great resource if you're starting to study and learn,
Hmm.
is to take advantage of either your local library, your local university library, or your local museum library.
Yeah. 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 That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Um, so do you want to talk about the exhibition that you have up right now?
We have a fabulous and quite wonderful exhibition by Ann Hamilton, who is an Ohio native and lives in Columbus. She's an amazing artist who mostly is known for her installations, but from the beginning of her career on, she's really worked consistently also with photography and video. And so we have an exhibition that she made of images. I'll show you the book that comes with the exhibition, accompanies the exhibition. The show and the book,
Wow.
Still and Moving.
Uh-huh.
Oh no, I always do that. Yeah, Still and Moving, the tactile image. And the exhibition is 14 feet tall images of small scale porcelain and crush works, small scale figurative sculptures from our collection, which she used
Oh,
a wand scanner, a hand scanner
uh-huh.
to picture. Sort of hard to see, but and
Uh-huh.
so the catalog is 7/8 artist book. The whole first part of the catalog is an artist book created by Anne, and then I have an essay in the back about her use of photography. So
Wow.
it's quite wonderful, published by the museum and distributed by Yale University Press. And the
Beautiful.
exhibition itself has sound. There's a soundtrack that goes with these 14-foot tall images that surround you in the gallery. And it's really an immersive experience, which I had an argument with one of our younger staff members who said, "You can't call it immersive. It's not digital." And I said, "Oh, we had immersive experiences long before there was digital technology." And it is just an environment that is peaceful and meditative, and it's almost like being in a hall of tapestries. And then
Wow.
there's a second gallery that has one wall that shows some of her past uses of photography, all of which are non-traditional, of course, because
Mhm.
she's a out of the box thinker. And
Mhm.
then three spinning videos that she's made that spin around the room and interface with the exhibition, the images that are in the other room. And so it's quite a marvelous. It's on view through April 19th.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
We
Oh, I
welcome
love
visitors to
that.
Cleveland.
I love
It's
that.
the museum is amazing. It's large. Plan on a long time to come and visit because we have an astonishing collection. And people get here and they're always shocked. They walk through the galleries and go, "I didn't know this was in Cleveland. I didn't know this was in Cleveland." So we have one of those
Yeah.
collections where you saw it in your textbooks and you
Uh-huh.
never thought about where it was, and it's here. So it's really a masterworks, and this temporary exhibition just really is also a masterwork of Anne's, and it comes directly from inspiration in our collection.
Wow. Oh, I love that. I love that so much. That's fantastic. I want to ask you one more question before we
Okay,
wrap up, if that's okay.
sure.
Um, what's your favorite part about being a curator?
I love, I'm not a favorites person, but I do love the variety of my job.
Hmm.
That one day I'm writing, one day I'm lecturing, another day I'm, working and researching acquisitions. I love, of course, being with the original artworks and looking at them. And I'd have to say that perhaps one of my favorite things is to see people interact with the art. I love going into the galleries and watching people interact with the art and knowing that I'm not just studying the art and writing about it, but I'm also giving people that direct experience of the artist's vision and what they made.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Wow, that's fantastic. I love that so much. Oh, you've given us so much to think about and to chew on, and I love your perspective, and I think that collectors watching this are going to really feel a lot of it, feel like get a better understanding and maybe get some insight to with their own collection. Um, and they're collecting and and I just love your perspective so much. Um,
Thank you. Thank you
is
so much.
is there anything that you want to add to what we talked about more?
Oh, I would say, enjoy being in the world of art and photography. It's a great pleasure. It's a great luxury. And, our museum, I know a lot of museums charge a lot of admission now, but our museum is entrance is always free.
Mhm.
Take advantage of that, or pay what you wish places that, and just go spend some time with art.
Yeah,
It'll
yeah.
make everything seem a lot better.
Yes, I think we all need that these days for sure. For sure. Wow. Ugh, wow. Well, that's so wonderful. I want to, be respectful of your time. We've taken like almost an hour, so I'm so happy. This is exactly what I was looking for,
Great. That's great. I'm so
Yeah.
happy.
Yeah, and I will let you know when it's all up and people can see it um and this has just been a wonderful conversation. I'm just so happy to see you and to talk with you and to get this insight, and I think people watching will really get a lot out of it. So, thank you so much.
Thank you for the visit. It's been very
Yeah.
pleasant. Thanks.
Yeah. Good. Okay. Well, until next time, and I guess that we'll just say so long until we see
So
each other
long.
again. Okay, take care.